In the Wild West world of podcasting, there is one podcast that is authentic and genuine and continues to stand tall in its originality. Based on a passion for his guests, their work, and his love of podcasting, Derek Thomas and Monday Morning Critic Podcast get amazing, diverse, unique guests found nowhere else. They include Hall of Fame athletes, Academy Award winners, Golden Globe winners, Super Bowl champions, Emmy winners, award-winning authors, award-winning film score composers, directors, trailblazers, pioneers, and inventors. The variety and quality are endless. There is something for everyone. Derek Thomas is the hero you deserve. He's a silent guardian, a watchful protector. Welcome to Monday Morning Critic Podcast. Here is Derek Thomas.
My next guest is an actor, director, and martial artist. His filmography includes the Bourne Ultimatum, the underrated Snow White and the Huntsman, and the absolutely fantastic The Old Guard, currently available on Netflix. Please welcome Joey Ansah. Joey, thanks again for being on the show.
It's my pleasure.
So, Joe, you and I were talking off air. We talk about, I don't think you'll mind that I share this, but we were talking about, the love and passion of movies and what really gets us into it, right? So if my research is right, yours probably starts around when your dad, who was an absolutely legendary fashion designer, he used to rent videos for you, come home, and you two would sit and watch, the absolute classics that we both love, like anything with Arnold in it, Stallone, Bruce Lee, Van Damme. Am I close to where you started to develop this love of cinema?
Yeah, I would think, definitely. And let's throw in films like Aliens. The kind of intrigue, because I guess you're playing with action figures as a guy and you're watching He-Man and Mask, the cartoon. And so in terms of guys with muscles fighting and doing action and stuff, when you see the live action equivalent of that, it's exciting. And of course, it had huge inspiration. But I remember Aliens in particular, and the first one was something so intriguing and so out of the realm of what is in a child's mind. Not that I'm saying out here I recommend every parent to screen their 8-year-old or 7-year-old Aliens, but you sneak in, and what it was like in the 80s. Parents were a bit more chilled out with what kind of ratings films were. So you get exposed to things like RoboCop and Alien, stuff that's quite shocking or has a very strong art concept or production design. It leaves a mark on you, and you become aware that there's this kind of medium, there's an art form that can suck you in and make you want to rewatch this thing over and over, because I guess that's the big difference. There are cartoons that we're fans of, but I don't remember watching a single episode of a cartoon over and over as many times as I did certain movies that had an impact on me. So I think that rewatchability of films means you sort of download the whole DNA of the production into you, and then you end up doing what I do for a living.
No, that's really well said, and I love the way you said it. And before we kind of go down this road, I like when I go on my guest's Instagram just to get a feel for what kind of person they are. I wanted to bring up a few things for you, to you. I didn't know that you were a gamer. I didn't know that.
Yeah, man, hugely. For any of you listeners out there that know or don't know, I have done several live action Street Fighter incarnations. It started off with a short YouTube film called Street Fighter Legacy that had about in total 10 million views. You can find, if you type Street Fighter Legacy on YouTube, you can see where this journey began. I loved Street Fighter the game so much that it really broke my heart seeing what they had done with the live action movies. Because on one hand, I was a huge Ninja Turtles fan of the Eastman and Laird graphic novels and comic books, the cartoon. And then when the first 1990 TMNT movie came out, it was incredible. So I'd almost been spoilt by such an amazing live action adaptation of an IP that I enjoyed in comic format. So when the Van Damme Street Fighter came out, you're like, oh no. I mean, Mortal Kombat, conversely, I think safe to say that most fans of the game were pretty pleased with the Mortal Kombat movie. But Street Fighter was like, oh, and then when Legend of Chun-Li came out, I was like, something has broken inside me. And it's now clear that the studio system is never going to deliver the kind of Street Fighter movie I want to see. So I set out on this almost crusade to almost take on the studios, and do. So after Legacy, I did a feature film that was originally released on YouTube on the Machinima channel as 12-minute episodes, like a web series called Street Fighter Assassin's Fist, that was very successful. We made it for a budget of $3 million, and I wrote it, directed it, played Akuma in it, did the fight choreography. So it was a real passion project, and it found a huge, very loyal fan base. And yeah, so I won't go on too much, but yeah, gaming has been a massive stimulation for my martial arts devotion, and I guess it's been a big part. It started my filmmaking journey, as a writer-director.
There's an old saying, Joe, put your money where your mouth is. I mean, you put your heart there, right? I mean, you really invested yourself, and there's something beautiful to be said about what you did with that franchise, right?
Sure.
So the other two things I wanted to ask you about, I loved and this is going back maybe a few months, maybe in a few years in some cases, a tribute to the movie Blind Fury. Oh, I love that as well. I thought that was a neat little post you had a couple years back. I forget his name. He passed away.
Yes, Rutger Hauer.
There you go. Yeah, and what an underrated, wonderful movie that was.
Yeah, definitely, man. I can remember. So I for listeners out there, I was born and raised in London until I was 9 years old, and then our family emigrated to Ghana in West Africa, and that's where my father's from. So I'm half Ghanaian and half English. And it was when me and my brother were in Ghana that I first saw that film. And I can remember there's like a blinding flash. Isn't there some white phosphorus grenade or bomb from a plane goes off and blinds him? And then he's taken in by some kind of, indigenous Vietnamese tribe or Laotian or Cambodian tribe, and is trained how to operate as a blind guy. And then the sword work, right? Am I remembering that correctly?
You are exactly right, yes. And the last thing that I wanted to ask you about, and it's more recent, but I feel like Avengers Endgame was so beautifully done. I know everyone's like, oh, no, duh. But it really, there's a lot of modern movies out that aren't as good as people are saying. They're maybe a little bit inflated. I feel like Avengers Endgame was not only great as a Marvel movie, but I felt like it was the most emotional, maybe Dark Knight Rises, that trilogy aside, superhero movie ever made.
Yeah, I'm almost intrigued as to why you're bringing this up. Is it because you are aware that film absolutely gutted me in a good way emotionally, or maybe I put an Instagram post up that you read, but yeah.
No, those are all, everything I just brought up, those three things are all from your Instagram page, and I was really taken back by how moved you were by the movie. That's why I bring it up.
Yeah, I was just reminiscing about this with a good friend of mine just a few days ago, actually. Again, I was a huge fan of the Marvel comics, so I'm coming at the MCU movieverse already versed in the lore of the Marvel world through the comics, and I kind of inherited some of my cousin's comics. So I had like Captain America comics going back to the 60s and stuff, like really vintage era Marvel stuff where the pages were all yellowed and stuff. But the culmination of the films, if you've gone on that whole journey and invested in seeing each of the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 films, what they did in Endgame, particularly, it all comes together, right, with Cap catching Mjolnir. When that happens, because what's so genius is that they seed it in Age of Ultron. Obviously, they're all chilling, having the party at Stark Towers, and they're all trying to lift the hammer, and Captain does it, and it shifts a little bit, right? And you see Steve Rogers you see Thor almost raise his eyebrows as if to go, "Oh shit! Did that happen? What I thought just happened? Did it happen?" And then you kind of forget about it, and you were toyed through with the idea for a while that Steve Rogers is worthy. If anyone was going to be worthy enough to wield Mjolnir, it would be him. But then you forget about it, so it's great misdirection. So that climactic fight when everyone's kind of out for the count, more or less, and Thor's doing his thing, but he's getting Stormbreaker pushed into his chest by Thanos, and then you see Mjolnir vibrate and suddenly fly, and your instant thing is, oh, Thor has managed to, whilst having his ribcage caved open, he's managed to, control the hammer and strike Thanos. And when it strikes him and moves beyond him, and then you see that all-important shot of Thor's eyebrows raising, and you're like, no, someone else is moving it. And then when just the way Captain catches that, the physicality, I can really appreciate an actor who knows how to. There's some moments where you have to do that Hollywood heroic posturing, and the way he catches Mjolnir, you're just like, it's like your insides fall out at that moment.
I'm getting goosebumps listening to you describe this, because I know exactly what you're saying, and it's topped off, and I hope I got this right. It's topped off with your fellow co-star Chris Hemsworth when he says, "I knew it." Like it's just it's the cherry on top of the sundae, right? It's the perfect reaction.
Yeah, it's glorious. Like, it truly is. Like, if you were to dictionary definition of glorious, that is a moment that. And it's a funny thing, as a cinephile yourself, when you find yourself watching a movie when tears are running down your face, not because what you're seeing is sad, but what you're seeing is so magnificent that you're having some kind of central nervous system short circuit. It's a really odd phenomenon. It's like you could call it a religious experience almost. It's like the Michael Jackson effect. You are seeing an idol, a living deity. And it's a funny concept. Let's take the Michael Jackson thing. People who are the biggest fan have gone to see this guy live in concert, and they've somehow got front row, position. And they faint, and they collapse, and they have to get carried out of there. And you think that is the last thing they want to do, is miss the show and not see it. Yet their nervous system has been so overwhelmed by the majesty of what they're seeing that it has to protect itself by shutting you down, almost putting you into a temporary induced coma to stop you suffering some kind of epileptic, damage to your brain. When you really analyze what is happening on a physiological, neurological level, it's quite incredible. And films can have that effect. And Endgame, for me and my girlfriend, we're watching it with. And then it hits you. It's not just a 1-2 punch. He catches Mjolnir, then he does the sickest combos with it,
Right.
And the hammer and shield combos and the lightning going across the ground, and then he does the massive slam, and you're like, geez, he's almost doing cooler stuff with this than Thor has. And then with the whole, his shield has been hacked to bits, and he's the last man standing, and in spite of his valiant efforts with Mjolnir, the jig is up. And then, you can feel Cap, who is the kind of bastion of hope, is down to his last bar of hope, And then when he hears the kind of static come over his comms, and you hear Falcon on your left, and then you see the warm glow, even the use of light. It's such a dark, depressing, morose landscape, the color palette of where they're fighting Thanos, that's suddenly injecting this warm, magic hour glow even that has an emotionally profound effect, the visuals and, T'Challa coming through, and it then hits you and you're completely putty in the filmmaker's hands. The tears are then just streaming almost continuously towards the end, till the end of the film at that point.
Boy, I love to hear. I've never heard it put the way you just said, but I completely agree. And for me, that moment, and not to get too far off track, but for me, that moment was in 1994 when I saw The Shawshank Redemption, Joey.
Yes.
I went right to the bathroom, and I'm going to sound like an absolute wuss when I say this, but I sobbed for 5. I could not believe I could not believe that somebody crafted a movie that was that powerful. I was not expecting it. When I saw it in the theaters, I lost my shit in a way that I can never describe again.
Yeah, it's wonderful to be open to that. The way I started to unlock my emotions was to watch films and think, I am not going to resist being moved by the film. If I feel it's starting to do something deep down in the in the cauldron, I'm going to let it happen. I'm not going to force something, but I'm not going to resist something. And it was The Last Samurai that was the keystone film that broke the seal. The final charge, and when Cruz gives the sword, Katsumoto's katana, to the Emperor, and it opened floodgates, and I was in the cinema crying almost continuously for about 10 minutes, and it was like, it wasn't just crying at the film, but it was all the suppressed emotion for the last decade of my life was coming out in that moment. And it was deeply profound. So then I was then chasing down other films that would give me that experience, randomly. When I was filming the Bourne Ultimatum, I was in Morocco. I can remember I saw The Hurricane, the Denzel Washington film about the boxer, for the first time. And that completely gutted me, I was crying my eyes out at that. And as you said, Shawshank, Man on Fire messed me up. Ray.
Man on Fire. Yeah. Man on Fire was a tough. I mean, I absolutely loved it. You're right. Talk about a movie that I almost want to bet somebody that they can't hold it together during that movie. The Ultimate Sacrifice, right?
Yes, completely. And it's about, I get very, for me, if a film doesn't make you feel something on a visceral level, it hasn't succeeded. Because you could let's take something like Extraction that came out recently.
Great
Very
movie.
Similar plot to Man on Fire.
Yep.
I would directly put them in the same, barrel. Now, Extraction has some great filmmaking techniques, some phenomenal action. I could reel off all the things it did right. But from an emotional level, a character attachment level, it didn't do anywhere close to what Man on Fire did.
Right.
And for me personally, although the John Wick films are landmark films because you finally got stunt coordinators, second unit directors, main uniting, and seeing action done, and they're stylish films, they're lit well, there's some cool... I don't feel anything personally, and I don't want to hate on anyone's work. Art is subjective, right? Different things move different people. But the John Wick films leave me emotionally flatlining. I'm like, if I was hooked up to some kind of heart rate monitor and hormonal, like a lie detector thing that measures moisture release from your fingertips, sweat glands, I think there are certain films I flatline through. And I'm like, cerebrally, my brain is thinking about the plot logically, but I'm not feeling anything emotionally. And then you see something like The Dark Knight, like Shawshank, like Man on Fire, like Whiplash. I tell people Whiplash is a better action movie than 95% of action movies, and it's not an action film.
Are you
But
talking about the movie with J.K. Simmons, that Whiplash?
Yeah.
Yeah, great
Yes.
movie. Great movie.
But do you understand where I'm coming from?
Absolutely, and I love how you're saying it. Absolutely.
Because that is how an action movie should make you feel. The stakes, two nemeses truly coming together and in a showdown, and Rocky does that. The heart that Rocky, particularly in Rocky 2, when he finally beats Apollo, Whiplash is comparable. The emotional journey you go on is similar. And I'm like, how can a film about a drummer make me feel more scared, more energized, more tense than 90% of the action films that come out, you know? And I'm like, it's because the filmmakers are not grasping the human side of it, the human condition, and those elemental themes that move all of us, you know?
Joe, you know what it is too, and I love how you're saying is, and it's not this simple, but I think it's relationships, right? We talk about Endgame. That whole movie works because of relationships and things they built. Like, the more you talk about Extraction, the more I was thinking, I'm like, yeah, he's right, because it works in a lot of ways, but there's just not this relationship where it's like you're emotionally vested in the movie. It works for a lot of reasons, like you said, but I think a lot of the stuff, like in Whiplash, I mean, that relationship, maybe it's an unhealthy one, but it's a relationship and it's solid and you believe it.
Completely. And as a villain, like as J.K. Simmons is more terrifying than almost. Name one villain that you've seen recently in a film that is compelling or terrifying as J.K. Simmons' character is in that. And I think a lot of films could take a leaf out of that film's book of how do you build up intimidation factor, you know? No. I think it's not since Bill the Butcher in Gangs of New York, where you're actually terrified.
Yes.
When Cameron Diaz and Leo DiCaprio wake up in bed and Day-Lewis is sat right next to their bed with the American flag draped over his shoulders, just staring at them, you almost have cardiac arrest at that moment, you know?
Right. No, that's so well said, because I feel like a lot of the villains that we see, you know, because they wield a gun, because they've killed some people, we're all of a sudden expected to feel, oh wow, this. But we've seen that done 1,000 times before, where there's no equivalent to Bill the Butcher. There's no equivalent to what J.K. Simmons did. So yeah, you're right. I can't name a villain that is so authentic and fresh that we haven't seen before. I feel like it's stuff. Okay, I've seen this before. This has been done before. You're right. That hasn't been done in a long time.
And it's missing another villain that needs very special mention. And I talk about this film and this guy so much is Deacon Frost in the first Blade.
Good one.
Played by Stephen Dorff.
Good one.
I think that is. Now, this is deep diving, but hopefully your fan base are going to be into cinema and characterization enough to appreciate this. Let me drop some truth on you here. What is so wonderful about Blade, from a narrative construction point of view, is your antagonist, Frost, is fighting two battles. One is internally within the vampire hierarchy. He is battling for respect and control against the Vampire Council, who are all purebloods, and he was a vampire who was turned, so he's not afforded the respect of a pureblood. And he feels that the Vampire Council are too antiquated, they're not looking towards the future, and it's going to be the end of them. And there needs to be some kind of coup d'etat by him to sort of bring the new wave, the new sort of vision of vampires moving forward. So he's got that battle, and the film dotes a lot of time on that struggle. Then he's got the second struggle. Blade is a real bloody thorn on our sides, and He's messing up our operations, and moreover, I need him if I'm to unlock La Magra, the blood god, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you look at Blade, Blade himself has two elemental battles. One is to kill vampires, right? He's a vampire hunter, and, you know, systematically take down their hierarchy. And two, he's fighting his own thirst. He's fighting the ever-growing call to give in to his vampirical savage side. So his human side and his vampire side are in constant conflict. And even Whistler says the serum is not working like it used to, i.e. you are on a kind of crash course for where you sooner or later you're going to have to drink human blood, you know? Mm. And it's that duality. Very few films have that, where the protagonist and antagonist are fighting against each other, but they're simultaneously fighting their own battles that have nothing to do with their rival, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And that makes that film very, very special in terms of the hero. And Stephen Dorff does such a good job in that film. And I love that you see vulnerability in the villain, you know? You remember that? Am I allowed to swear?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Remember when they meet in the park, you know, and he's got the sunblock on, and he's like, I've come to sort of, offer you a truce type thing. You know, it's like, he came to offer you a truce and he's throwing in my fucking face. You remember, like, you can tell he's butthurt because Blade is so uncompromising. He doesn't give a shit. And he's like, you're just another dead vampire. And throwing in my fucking face. And when he's like, you're an animal, you're a fucking maniac. You remember, like, and when Froster's got his sidekick who keeps getting his arm chopped off by Blade throughout the film. I forget his name. But one bit he's like, oh man, no, you don't understand. This Blade's he's fucking dangerous, dude. He's got these mad judo throws. And remember, Froster's like, yeah, he throws you up and he catches you underneath. Shut the fuck up. like any mention of Blade makes Frost slightly anxious. And it's really nice when you see a villain who's very powerful, but there's a human side. They're scared. They have anxiety. They're stressed. You know,
yeah,
and not many films do that, where they show the because it's nice. It's like the villain temporarily. You almost empathize with the villain. You feel sorry for them because the hero then almost becomes the bad guy, the dark specter. You know,
yeah, and you and I can have an entire episode about why Stephen Dorff is maybe one of the most underrated actors on the planet, Joey.
Well, thank goodness for True Detective season 3.
Yes,
and that's his staircase back where he deserves to be in the big time. You know, doing big things.
Well said. Well said. And while you were speaking, I'm like, I was trying to come up with names of original people. I can only come up with a few. Heath Ledger goes without mention, right? Very original.
Sure.
How about the villain in No Country for Old Men?
Yeah, he is.
Anton something. I can't remember the last name. It was Anton. But I thought it was an original. Like you talk about being terrified in a movie. Feeling terrified watching it. You
Aren't you talking about Javier Bardem?
That's it. That's it. You said
it. Yeah. He's goddamn terrifying. When he goes into the store and is like, what does he say? Like, are you a betting man?
Right.
Doesn't he do a coin toss with the store clerk who's not done anything wrong? You're
Nothing.
Like, why are you going after this dude?
And his weapon of choice is terrifying. And I would even throw in separate movies, Agent Smith from The Matrix and Hans Landa from Inglourious Basterds.
Inglourious Basterds, completely.
But no, you're right.
A delicious villain. He goes into the delicious category.
Oh, when he's talking to that farmer about his daughters and he's drinking milk like he's his best friend and his intentions. Oh my God. Like, you're right. Where is the originality of these characters? Like, these are unique, but these are like far and few between guys. You know what I'm saying, Joey? Like, we don't see that a lot.
Yeah, no, completely.
You know, and not getting too far off here, but I did want to ask you this too. So I don't know, when I was a kid, and I'm sure I'm older than you, but we used to always, the legends that got you loving movies like Stallone and all these guys, Van Damme. As a kid, we used to always, not knowing any better, we were like, Seagal could take Tyson or Mike Tyson. We used to have these conversations, who could beat who up. I don't know. I feel like looking back now, I feel like when I see a guy like Jackie Chan who's so underrated and underappreciated, I feel like, not by everybody, but I look at a guy like that, but then I look at a guy like Steven Seagal that we may have overrated greatly. And I'm not trying to crap on Steven Seagal, but I don't know. I just feel like you're a martial arts expert. We're going to get into that in a moment. What's your take on those guys? Who's the guy that really impressed you the most? That you were like, Bruce Lee aside, I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah.
But is there a guy that you like when you look back, you're like, God, I think he's so much better than I initially gave him credit for?
That's a good question. Different. It's appreciating what each of them had, what their USP is and was. Seagal seems like a pretty unpleasant person, and his reputation precedes him. However, I think for me, the pinnacle, Out for Justice, the whole bar scene. Anybody seen Rico or whatever? Anybody know who did Bobby Lupo? And that whole scene, in terms of a guy going into a gangster bar and intimidating the shit out of everyone in there and bullying them. There's almost no scene like that. That stands alone. You know the scene I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Just even him shaking down and intimidating the poor barman. It's like, I see a lot of boxing memorabilia over here. Who's the boxer? You the boxer? Yeah. You a tough guy? Yeah. What could you do? I love that question. What could you do? It's great. It's great that and when you look at a scene like that, Van Damme couldn't have pulled that off. Jackie couldn't pull that off. It's just like,
no, that's true. Yeah,
they couldn't, because Seagal is a goddamn walking roadblock. At that time, he must be, 6'6", 6'7". He's
You're right, big guy.
Big guy with those sort of sunken beady eyes and that heavy brow and the slick back, He just had a kind of... His peak, his charisma and aura, swag, was at max at that point,
Yeah.
And... the Aikido, the way he moved in that time, in terms of he brought something fresh from all the striking we were used to seeing. This, all the joint locks, joint manipulations, and painful looking wrecks. As you know, Seagal is famous for hurting quite a lot of stunt guys. That gave him bad rep, and that's why some of the shit looks so painful that Seagal does, because he is genuinely... So stories would be like in rehearsals, he's doing an outside wrist lock, and he will let it. For anyone who's listening who does BJJ or has done any kind of grappling, joint manipulation art, you'll know what I'm talking about. For those of you who don't, for example, when you see an Aikido demonstration and they put a wrist lock on someone, the person who's being thrown seemingly throws themselves to do a half somersault to unwind their twisted wrist to stop it breaking. And then you do a break fall. When you see someone hit the ground and seemingly slap the ground with the length of their arm, that dissipates the impact of your body hitting the floor and stops you being winded. Now, if you throw someone and you're being kind, you'll release pressure off the lock before they hit the ground. That allows them to break fall. But if you want to be really savage, or you're in a genuine combat situation, you want to do the wrist lock, but drop your body weight so you're driving the mass of your opponent through the floor.
Right.
And then, no matter how much you try and break fall, you are still being slammed through the floor. And from what I hear, from stunt guys. Even Chad Stahelski, who directs John Wick, he was a stunt guy back then, and I hear he got, I think, his collarbone bust. Because in rehearsals, Seagal will let the lock off at the right time, but during a take, he'll drive you into the ground. So you cannot protect yourself and break fall, and you end up just getting broken, you know?
Right.
And there's this famous urban legend that Gene LaBelle was stunt coordinating one of these films, and when he saw that Seagal had bust up one of the stunt guys, he went and choked him out.
Wow.
Have you heard that story?
I have not heard that story.
Yeah, you Google it afterwards. I'm sure you'll find several sources and anecdotal reports about that. But yeah, Seagal had his thing. He's just no-nonsense, brutal and intimidating. Alpha, right?
Right.
Van Damme, as he, in his own words, said, he was the first person to make martial arts sexy. He had the clean lines, ballet background. He brought a aesthetic to martial arts that made you, in the same way that you would look at a poster of a Lamborghini or a Ferrari and those lines of the design of the car, you take a freeze frame of Van Damme doing the jump splits or a side kick, you're like, that's a beautiful form, you know? He's got a great physique. He was a bodybuilder. He's got a good tan. He's oiled up. And his lines are clean. Foot positions are clean. You compare someone like Chuck Norris to Van Damme, you'll see a difference in aesthetic, in attention to detail, you know?
So is Van Damme legit? Not Van Damme. Is Seagal? Would you say he's not as so much as an actor, but as a martial artist? Would you say he was very legitimate?
He's a legit Aikido guy for sure.
Right.
I mean, then you can have a question about, well, how useful or real is Aikido? But you could go through every martial art and weigh up in MMA, in the sort of crucible of MMA where things get pressure tested for real. How useful is Aikido in the real world? On someone untrained, for sure, you can make joint locks and wrist locks work, but against a trained fighter. But yes, I would say he lived in Japan and he is a legit Aikido black belt. No question. I mean, it doesn't need to be debated.
Wow. Yeah, and I think now it becomes a little cheesy because now you see on YouTube there's like I think he either lived in Russia or he's there a lot, where you see like he's sparring with these guys and the guys are pretty much rolling over on it's taken a new cheesiness factor to it, but no, it's good to hear that because you're obviously, and we're gonna get to this in a second, how established you are in the martial arts. But yeah, it's good to hear that he was very legitimate, but you got to wonder about the ethics of somebody who really, when the camera rolls, they step it up a level to the point where, you're putting people's safety at risk. And that's tough to stomach.
Yeah. It's, I guess there's a maliciousness and power can corrupt and, it says something about but then again, you could raise the question at Tony Jaa, who flying knees people in the head and kicks people in the... I mean, no one hits people harder for real in action cinema than Tony Jaa, Now, Tony Jaa is a lovely dude, by all accounts, but the stunt guys are willing to sacrifice and take the wreck, and they're trying to do something new. And when Ong Bak came out, you were like, Jesus Christ, these people are being smashed up, full contact kicks or knees to the head or chest in a way that you just hadn't seen before. I mean, you know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. And it got me thinking of a movie. What was it? Mentioning his name just got me thinking. What's that movie? The
Raid?
Yes. You talk about action movies. Holy cow.
Yeah, and there's a lot of brutal wrecks in that. I mean, The Raid was sublime when that came out. It was a real, like, okay, you get these kind of seismic shifts in action cinema, and that was one of them where you're like, okay, we are witnessing something new here.
Right.
And it's a lot of this is down to Iko Uwais, the star of that film, and the rest of his team, the rest of the actors, and Silat bringing that Indonesian style to screen. But Gareth Evans, I really respect, is a sort of a master filmmaker. I mean, Gangs of London, if you haven't seen it yet, you are in for an absolute treat, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And, and this will be the last thing I say because I do want to get into your unbelievable life here. You got me thinking of bar scenes because you were talking about Seagal earlier. It got me thinking, I don't know why, I don't know if you've ever seen A Bronx Tale where he tells the bikers, leave. Now he says, well, now you can't leave, and they close the door. You talk about frightening bar scenes. My mind is jumpy today, but you got me thinking about frightening bar scenes when you were talking.
Yeah.
But I have to say, man, I'm looking at your life here, and it's an amazing life, right? Because you mentioned how you moved to Ghana. That's kind of where you enhance your love of cinema, certainly martial arts, hip hop, Taekwondo. I mean, you have a lot going on here. And your life is the ultimate, Joey, your life is the ultimate for me on what people should try to aspire to. In other words, if I pick up the little things that you've done in your life, it's almost like a recipe, right? He's got a little of this, he's got a little of this. And together, when you put it together, it makes for one hell of a final product, right? Like everything you've experienced, I don't know, I look at your life and you've done a little of this and a little of that. Like, that's stuff that you can't teach, right? That's just a lifetime full of experiences. And I think all of that has served you so well and made you the person you're. Not that you need me to tell you this, but it's just amazing how it kind of clicked for me like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's something I want to zero in on something you said there that actually ties into Jackie Chan, who you mentioned. I remember reading his book, Jackie Chan, My Story, which is a great autobiography to read. And I'll be brief, he went to a Peking opera school, which is the traditional form of kind of, Chinese theatre, where the performers had to be able to sing, dance, tumble, like gymnastic tumble, use weapons, act. And that's where all of Jackie's skills that you see, the sort of kung fu comedy, acrobatic comedy, all comes from the Peking opera training. And Sammo Hung trained at the same school with him, Yun Biao. There's a couple of guys that all were brothers from that same era of a dying art form. Peking opera is like a dying art form, and they were some of the last sort of full-time practitioners signed up for 10 years under a kind of maniacal master that was so horrific that they plotted to assassinate him at times. Anyhow, during Jackie's time there, he says, I wasn't the best fighter. That was Sammo Hung. I wasn't the best tumbler. That was Yun Biao. I wasn't the best singer. I wasn't the best, but I was good at all of them. And the irony being that Jackie didn't excel in any one of those things. He wasn't the very best. But because he was good at all of those things, he could put that together into a package and ultimately has become more successful than either of his famous brothers who also graduated from that place. Do you see what I mean? And that really struck a chord with me reading that young, is that strive to be the best. But if you're someone that does dedicate themselves to quite a lot of things, you may not be able to be number one, because often to be number one in a specific field, you have to dedicate all of yourself to that one thing.
Yeah, right? and I totally agree. And there's one thing I feel like, and I'm sure you agree with this as well, I almost feel like, I don't want to sound cheesy here, but like he has a will. Jackie Chan, I find it's very comparable to what you have, a will and a drive and an effort level that is beyond compare, right? So you mentioned all those other things he's good at, and then kind of like the supplemental thing is this guy really wants it. Like if he wants it, his determination level is through the roof. Right? Would you agree with that, Joey?
Yeah, and I think your will can be forged. And it's very interesting, the concept of what makes someone determined, what makes someone not a quitter, what makes someone so... What makes someone so, I guess, filled with self-belief that they can take on mountains or beasts to the point that other people think you're crazy or you're deluded or you're arrogant? And it comes down to consolidating wins. So think a good analogy is, imagine you have a treasure chest, right? And initially it's empty. And whatever your first significant achievement is in life, you may win sports day, or you may have, I don't know, built something, or, you know, you got the girlfriend you really wanted, or the boyfriend you really wanted, or some milestone achievement in your life where the odds were potentially stacked against you to achieve that thing, right? You have a metaphorical trophy. Put that trophy in that treasure chest. Now you have one item in there. Daily look at that item and remind yourself, I achieved this against the odds. So if I can achieve this, let me use that energy to believe I can achieve something else where the odds are stacked against me. Gradually, you start to accrue more and more trophies, and you stuff them into this chest. So now eventually, every time you look in the chest, you're like, there's just reminders of how much you can achieve, and it should compound and compound until you have, your comfort zone is so huge. You're like, there is nothing that I cannot achieve that I set my mind to, but there is a finite amount of time and resources. So then it becomes a question of, what do I want to dedicate my resources to doing? Because you cannot do everything at the same time and beat the odds, right?
Right.
But that's very important. Some people, they're very high achievers, but they've got very low self-esteem and self-belief. And I'm like, none of the wins you're achieving are seemingly bolstering your sense of accomplishment or your ability to accomplish, you know?
Right.
There's a funny question. A very good friend of mine, who I'm still friends with today, who I went to school with. So I've known him since I was sort of 14, 15. So for a lot of people growing up, I was this guy that was obsessed with martial arts, and then obsessed with like martial arts tricking and gymnastics and doing flips and stuff. And so I first thought I'm going to be a stuntman. And I did Batman Begins, was the first big studio film I was on as a sort of junior stunt guy, as one of the ninjas in the League of Shadows, where Batman trains in the mountains and stuff, right? That was a turning point where I suddenly realized I've got it wrong. I don't want to be a stunt guy. I want to be an actor who can do his own stunts. And you know what? We had spent months rehearsing. There was all this cool ninja stuff that we were going to all move in formations and do this big kata together, and some of us were going to run and do these flips, and it was going to be much more ninja-y than you saw in the final film, right? Mm-hmm. But filmmaking is long and boring, you know?
Right.
The reality of being on a film set. So suddenly the hype of being a ninja had died off, and you're spending most of the time standing in rank and file. Now, it was the scene, we got to the scene where Christian Bale, it's like the end of his training, and remember, Ducard, Liam Neeson's character, says, right, there's this prisoner, and we need you to execute him.
Right.
Do you remember?
Yes.
And Bale's like, what was his crime? And they say, oh, he did X, Y, and Z. And Bale's like, I'm no executioner. Do you remember?
Yes, yeah.
And so that scene was playing out, and I'm in the front or second from the front row of ninja, so they were right close. So I was listening, and I felt goosebumps come up on the back of my neck just from the scene, the dialogue, the performance that Neeson and Bale were doing in front of me. I was like, wow, this is giving me the tingles. And I'm like, that's that feeling. That's that feeling I felt when I watched Rocky when I was a kid, or when I watched whatever it was. And here I am. And it's acting. It's not action that's making me feel it. It's character. It's conflict through character. And ultimately that leads to action and you flip the coin. It's character through action. And any good action scene that means something to you is because you care about the stakes of the characters. You don't actually care at two people just throwing cool moves and kicks and punches at each other. It's the stakes underpinning. What do we learn about this character through the way they fight, through what they do in the action scene?
No, and that's amazing too, because you're already this. I mean, Batman Begins, for my money, I mean, God, it's one of the best movies ever made, certainly in the superhero universe. But I have to say, here you are, this big movie fan, right? And you legitimately, we talk about having a front row seat for an event. You are right there watching two of the best actors in the world go back and forth in this epic movie. And I know you're saying, the process of putting it together can be tedious, but you use that opportunity to say, you know what? I'm on the wrong side of this. I want to be the guy doing what these two are doing, because your passion of movies alone. But then when you're watching it unfold, I mean, that's a level that none of us have ever seen in person.
Yeah, it's mad. And you're watching Nolan work. I feel so privileged to have seen, before Nolan became the bona fide deity of filmmaking, institution that we know him to be today. Because think, back then, Batman Begins, there was no Inception yet, there was no Prestige, there was none of the, no Dark Knight yet, so he was just, he had done Memento, he had done Insomnia, and here we are at, I believe, film number 3, right?
Right.
And just watching his method, that massively inspired me, I think, to also become a filmmaker down the line. And I remember his producing partner and wife, Emma Thomas, was super sweet and had time, and I could ask her questions, and I barely knew who or what a producer was at that time. I was 19, and she took the time to explain things. And Wally Pfister, the DOP, I remember seeing him putting up these flags on lights and putting this orange gel in front of one of the lights shining through the window of the temple, and to the naked eye you could clearly see there's a orange bit of transparent plastic sheet over the light. And I said to him, sorry to ask a silly question, but aren't you going to see that on camera? And he was like, no, come here. He said, come and look through the camera. Because of the lens we're using and the focal length, it's soft, so that's going to give a nice warm diffuse glow in here. You can't. And I was like, wow, that was the first time I understood lensing. And all it took was that to think, now I'm going to go buy a book and start learning about optics and lenses and, focal distance, and why is a 70mm lens the glamour lens that's used. When you see leading ladies in films, that's typically a lens size they use because it's most glamorous, where you've got that narrow depth of field and it's soft behind them and soft in front of them, and they are just, you know what I mean? All this stuff, it opens up a whole new world of stuff that you hadn't really thought too deeply about. But curtailing this story, so I had done Batman Begins and stuff, and then it was Eureka. So that experience of the goosebumps, plus a stunt guy telling me, if you love stunts and you love the physicality and you don't want glory or attention, be a stuntman and you'll have a good career and you'll earn good money and you'll enjoy it. He said, but if you want glory, if you want to be seen and you want to be recognized, be an actor, because it will eat you up. Be spending your life being a stuntman, watching other actors act, if deep down you want to be the one on camera doing the thing, right?
Right.
And I'm really glad, because it was just honest. And I was like, if I'm true to myself, I do want it. And when I say glory, it's not in terms of red carpets and money and just frivolous sort of side effects, but in terms of, if I do something incredible on film, I want people to know it's me. I don't want to risk my life doing some insane stunt or something and people not even know it's me and think it's the actor doing it. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
So that was the change. And I remember telling one of my housemates, who's still a friend today, this is what I want to do. I'm going to be an actor. And his reaction, he was like, what? And I said, yeah. He said, what? You, an actor? And I said, yeah. And he said, what? Like Robert De Niro? like a a proper actor. And I was like, okay, you picked one of the greatest dramatic actors in the world. But yeah, and he's like, what makes you think you can just walk into Hollywood and be an actor? You haven't gone to drama school. I was doing a degree in human biology, of all things, at the time, at university. And he couldn't, this is the thing, he couldn't wrap his head around, where is this guy getting the fucking cojones to even think he can do this? But it comes back to the treasure chest analogy, you know?
Yeah.
I had developed that self-belief that I can do this. I have to apply myself very hard, but I can do this. And the rest is history, right?
Joy, but how about this? It takes a lot of effing cojones to tell. Like, here you are opening yourself up. You're so happy. You've come to this big moment in your life. And you have a housemate basically shitting all over this beautiful moment you've had. That takes bigger cojones in maybe a more negative way. But I don't know. I feel like the reaction should have been, you know, good for you, man. It's going to be a tough road, but I think you could do it. And instead he comes out with Robert De Niro, and I don't know. He's just destroying your dream that you've just so proudly opened up to. Boy, that's a tough moment to experience, I bet.
It is tough, but you need to be pressure tested like that. Because if I was like, shit, you're right, maybe I'm biting off more than I can chew, then the fire wasn't burning brightly enough anyway. You know?
Right.
As Arnold says, trust yourself, don't listen to the naysayers. break the rule, but not the law. You know, like, don't listen to the naysayers. You almost need that. You need people to challenge you. It's like writing a script. When you write a script, you should, number one, be very passionate about it and get it to a point that you think, this is fucking great. I defy you to not enjoy this. And then you want people to I want you to try and pick flaws on this.
Right.
I think if you don't welcome criticism and critique, then your ego is way too present. I mean, what is ego, right? It's an interesting and important thing to talk about. It's fear. Any egoic manifestation, jealousy, greed, being a braggart or arrogant, obnoxious, all of those things are projections of fear. And it's really interesting to sort of meditate on that.
No,
someone who go on.
And what an amazing moment for you to come to that realization on a Christopher Nolan movie. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just where you came to the decision and how is a beautiful story in itself. I had an actor, she was in Interstellar, and she was talking about what Chris Nolan is like on set. You know, he's like, no cell phone. She said he's no cell phones. He's very rigid and very, you know, he knows what he wants. But what an amazing way, an amazing moment for you to come to that realization, Joey.
Yeah, it's funny where from small acorns, right?
Right.
You know, the seed has got to germinate somewhere and expand your mind. I mean, look, that was where it started, but I think the vision expansion continued to grow, and there's a very poignant moment on the Bourne Ultimatum. So that was my big break.
Right.
And that was the most mind-warping thing. You may want to come back to that process first, because every actor's big break, right, is something interesting to hear about. But if I just fast forward to getting the call that you've got the role of Desh, and tomorrow you're flying to LA to train at 8711 for 2 weeks fight training and whatever, you would think maybe some people do jump for joy and scream and shout and holler like you see in the movies, you know. But when I got that call that confirmed it, I remember just hanging up the phone and sitting down. It was actually a very somber moment. Because I was like, we all have dreams and aspirations in life, but to play a major part in an iconic French Hollywood franchise is the stuff of fantasy. It's almost like saying I want to be a NASA astronaut and go into space and go on the ISS or land on the moon or whatever. So when that actually happens, you have this weird sort of operating system update in your mind, right? Because it's like your brain now has to be compatible with software that you believe to be a fantasy, that you would chase but never necessarily achieve. But now you've actually achieved this. This is real, and you're only 23. You're a young dude. So now, when you look into your future, now what do you see? Well, it's changed the game now. Because if you've already achieved something that was fantastical and nigh on impossible at 23, well, what next? What shift happens in your brain? And I remember telling Matt this. So fast forward into having been filming for a couple of months, and me and Matt Damon, he's an amazing guy. You know, he's someone I have nothing but wonderful things to say. But I remember we had a discussion. I said, look, Matt, this is my big break. So you can imagine how this feels for me. But for you, this is your third Bourne movie. You are currently Forbes magazine's most bankable star in the world in that year, 2006. I'm like, how does it feel for you now? Does it still feel amazing, or is it just kind of par for the course now? And he thought about it, and he was like, no, it's still amazing, but it evolved, and the conversation went on, and he, jumping to the sort of the punchline, the finale, he was like, him and Don Cheadle were playing golf one time, and they got into a conversation about how does it change once you've had your big break and you've #made it. What changes? And they had a discussion. They came to the conclusion, it is a very succinct proverb. Before you have your big break, your dreams have a ceiling limit. You can see a solid, out-of-reach goal, right? But once you achieve your big break, suddenly your dreams have no limit. So it's like Neo. It's like Mr. Anderson believing he is the one. Once he becomes the one, he can see the very fabric of the Matrix. It's like you can see the code of your destiny, and now you have the ability to start manipulating it to forge a life that you want to forge, that is by your design, if that makes sense. And that was very profound. It's like, yeah, before you make it, there's a limit. There's something out of touch, but you can see it. But then after you make it, you're like, well, fuck. I can probably do anything I turn my mind to. It may take 10 years to achieve it, but I can probably do it. So it gives you this kind of inhuman self-belief that others on the outside may perceive as you're deluded, you're arrogant, you're delusional, whatever. If your fantasy, you can do this. And as a filmmaker, like with Street Fighter, thinking I'm going to take on the studios and as a first-time feature filmmaker, independently raise $3 million and write, direct, star in, choreograph a thing, you would think I'm nuts.
Right.
It sounds nuts, me saying it to you now. I almost feel pissed off at the arrogance of the person who would think to do that.
Right.
but I was that person,
right.
And I did it, right? And you pull it off. So it's yeah, we've kind of come full circle. It's you compound achievements and self-belief and discipline, and you understand the price. These things come at a price, you know, you have to sacrifice. I spent all of my 20s forging my career, not going out and having fun in clubs and bars and just fucking about so much. I was kind of very much like, let me dedicate my late teens and 20s to getting my career going. Then hopefully by the time I'm 40, I can be having a real chill life, you know?
Right. And what you didn't mention, and obviously because you're not this guy, but what people listening, for those of you listening, one of the things that's so special about the senior in the Bourne Ultimatum is that many consider the fight scene between Bourne and Desh one of the best of all time. I think I went to 4 or 5 different sites. I think it's top 5 to 10 in most, which is unbelievable. And it's an amazing scene. But for you to kind of have not only a role, you said it to Matt, this is my shot here, but you just kind of, what you did with that opportunity is another conversation in itself. I mean, that's pretty amazing to have a scene like that. That's a pretty powerful first impression, I'd say, Joe.
Oh, for sure, especially in the. Sometimes, it's kind of like the stars align, and it's a gift and a curse, because as my big break getting Desh, this was like a role that I just felt. Once I got it, I felt like no one else can play this character but me. This character, and what was really cool is Paul Greengrass, when he casts someone, he believes they're the part, and he's quite hands off. He doesn't tell you what he wants at all. He'll just tell you that if he doesn't like something you're doing. But even the costume, I got to completely craft the jacket Desh wears, the trousers, the shoes, even the gun, the specific handgun, a choice out of 10 pistols.
Wow.
Got to completely create the character down to his detail. The hair, the look, everything. And that is really nice when you can put that personal stamp on a character. And just own it. Sometimes you land a role, and of course you always try and do your best, but you don't necessarily feel like it's Cinderella's slipper that perfectly fits your foot, Right. There's sometimes a bit of wriggle room in there. And that could be for any number of reasons. And so there's that in getting a character that you just feel an affinity to, and you understand the character. But then also, it was a great movie. And this is something I've been chatting with people recently. It's so rare for a movie to be truly great, as in it enters that rarefied air in cinematic history. It becomes a pillar of the cinematic story, that if aliens visited Earth and they wanted to understand what is cinema, the Bourne Ultimatum would be one of those films that is best in class for action thriller genre.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And you can go a decade or more. You could go 2-3 decades before you get in a film like that again. You may never be in a film like that again. Linda Hamilton will never be in a film as good as Terminator 2 again.
Right.
Sigourney, and it's quite sad actually when sometimes a young actor, you're like, they peaked. It will never get that good again. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
over some actors' careers, and they're still working and they're doing films. They're wealthy and they've still got a fan base. But you look back and you're like, we were talking about Morgan Freeman again, and I thought, since Shawshank, he's had some, films like Glory and we were going through what his most iconic roles, but it will never quite reach that summit of Everest perfection that Shawshank and maybe Driving Miss Daisy. There were maybe like 3 films that were quite early in his career.
Right.
And it's a slow downhill from there,
Right.
And it's strange, even actors with long careers. That's why Tom Cruise is such a phenomenon. The fact that he's still making movies now, and that he could churn out something as epic as Mission Impossible Fallout that I was in, that was an incredible experience, that the 6th movie in a franchise ends up being one of the very best of the franchise, right?
Right.
And it's impressive.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up Cruise, because I know we were talking earlier about Jackie Chan, but I feel like Tom Cruise has that. Like, he could easily give a successful performance at half the level he goes at, but I mean, he is so far over the top in wanting to put a quality product out there. I feel like there's nothing he wouldn't do for a movie, and I almost think that's such an impressive attitude to have.
Yeah, he is 100% about, talk about value for money, right? When you go and buy a ticket to see a Tom Cruise film, he's giving 110%. He's never phoning it in. He's never going through the motions. And he really wants the film to be the best it can be. He's passionate, and he's passionate about other characters in the film, aside from himself. I mean, look, he is the star. He is the sun in the solar system of whatever movie he's on. But he cares about the other planets, and he'll get upset. You know, he'll spend. You know what I mean. It's passion. It comes down to passion, and when a filmmaker or the star is passionate, that often comes through in the end product, and the audience feels something. They feel this energy that you can't put your finger on, but you're like, this is moving me because this guy is on the edge. Like, Cruise pushes it to the limit. Push it to the limit. Yeah, there's not many people that do that, do they?
No. And before I let you go, I did want to ask you about, you know, the amazing the old guard. But did it occur to you, and I mentioned the underrated Snow White and the Huntsman. Have you actually? I mean, maybe it's just a pure coincidence, but it is your second time working or being in the same cast as Charlize Theron. Was that? Yes. Is that just a complete coincidence, or like do you guys both realize that, or is that? I know not everyone sees everybody in the cast because you're filming different days, different roles. But it's kind of an interesting coincidence.
Yeah, we actually never crossed paths on Snow White because although ironically my character is working for her by proxy of her brother, this character played by Sam Spruill, we were never in the same space because all of the Queen's scenes are confined to the castle. You know, she's in that sort of, you know, castle chamber with a mirror, right? I don't remember her coming out of that really, or if she does, there's maybe a section in a garden where she bursts and turns into birds or something. But right. Yeah, but when I first met her on the Old Guard, I said to her, I was like, hey, Charlie, you know, we sort of, you know, had the introduction. I was like, we worked together on Snow White. You know, we didn't actually meet, but blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so that was something that we brought up. And it's funny, again, as a regarding Old Guard, the very first scene I shot in that, which again, I believe, so the first scene I shot was the scene where she's been double-crossed. Booker shoots her, and spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen it, so don't listen on if you don't want to be spoiled for the Old Guard.
Right.
But for those of you that have seen it, she gets double-crossed in Copley. We're in Chiwetel's house, and she gets shot in the back, and you realise she's not healing. And you remember Merrick and me and a bunch of, you know, soldiers enter the flat, and we had take them away. So I have to sort of straddle and pin Charlize down by the throat and inject her in the neck with a sedative that knocks her out, and then follow suit with Booker, played by Matthias Schoenaerts, and then we take them out of there. So it's very odd getting to know, working with an A-lister, a real powerhouse actress who you respect and who is, you know, is very impressive. Charlize is she's impressive on screen and she's impressive off screen, you know.
For my money, Joey, she's top 5 for my money. Like, male or female, she's in the Tom Hanks, Matt Damon, whomever else you want to have a conversation. For my money, I think, you know. Yeah,
she's it's just the power. Sometimes you meet someone, you're like, wow. She radiates a very strong charisma and she's just a powerful woman, right. You know. She's tall, she commands respect. She's tall, but she glides through the place, and she has one of those 1,000-yard stares that when she locks eyes with you, it's almost like, whoa, you almost feel like a White Walker in Game of Thrones looking at you. You're like, oh, shit, you're staring into my soul type thing. But it's very odd getting to know someone in this very sort of physical, visceral, intimate thing. wrestling them to the floor and straddling them and having to sort of grab them by the throat and stuff. And you're like, I barely had a conversation with you. And we're doing this scene for like a week or something. You know, like, this is how I'm getting acquainted. That's just one of the many head-scratching, funny things about filmmaking, that you come home that night and you're like, oh shit, that just happened.
And the funny thing, and you would know this, Joey, too. I mean, there's certain people, like, obviously people like me would not know, but you would. Like, Matt Damon and Charlize Theron seem like just wonderful people away from the camera. Like, there's some actors, you know, when the camera turns off, they're not very pleasant people. They are almost the opposite of that. They are just, they strike me as such kind people.
Yeah, and I think they're balanced. Like you were saying before, like life experience. I think you can very much tell when an actor has a fulfilling life filled with a variety of things outside of the movie business, i.e. the hype and the ego of being a movie star is not their number one interest. I think when they're a balanced, well-rounded, intelligent human being, they have passion and interest and purpose outside of the movie game. And if they're like that, then they're going to be interesting, dynamic, nice, balanced people off camera, behind the scenes, right?
Right.
Whereas there are probably some stars that are all about being a star. That's all they live for, is the power and the adoration, you know, and at times fear. Because, make no mistake, on some film sets there is a real climate of fear, as if you're hanging out with Pablo Escobar. Everyone may be laughing and joking, but you realize I am in the presence of someone who is very powerful, and if so, they can snap their fingers and people can be told, don't come back here tomorrow, you know?
Wow, yeah,
that's something people don't realize, the kind of like mob boss kind of aura that some stars can radiate is quite interesting.
Yeah, and I have to say, the movie itself works on so many levels. And just a side note, Chiwetel should have won an Academy Award for 12 Years a Slave. It maybe is one of the top 10 most powerful performances I've ever seen. But
he did win an Academy. He won the Oscar for it.
No, he lost to...
did he?
Yes, to Dallas Buyers Matthew McConaughey.
McConaughey. So, but why do I believe that Chiwetel has an Oscar? Have I just made that up and been living that lie?
No, he should have won that award. I mean, don't get me wrong, Dallas Buyers Club was wonderful, and Matthew McConaughey's a phenomenal actor, but I feel like that man poured his soul into that movie, and I don't know. I get sidetracked easily, but I don't know. When I see a cast like this, it's just it works on so many levels. Were you pleased with the final product, Joey? Were you happy with the Old Guard and the way it came out?
I think the Old Guard, look, it's a great, entertaining popcorn film in terms of pace. And look, this is the funny thing with the Old Guard. It's got one of the coolest premises that you can come in terms of what the cogs in your brain of your imagination moving forward. You're like, wow, it invokes Interview with a Vampire and The Crow and narratively those ingredients, and you're like, geez, there are so many ways this film can go. I mean, case in point, take the flashback with Booker, where he's by the campfire explaining to Niles' character, played by Kiki Lane, about how he had 3 sons, and the youngest of them died when they were 45 of cancer. And when your family become aware that you have this gift, this immortality, first they're amazed, but they start to become jealous. And then you're made into a pariah because they believe you're not sharing, you're being selfish and you're not sharing this gift with them. And that whole story of having to suffer outliving his kids and them turning on him because he couldn't help them, he couldn't save their ailing lives with this gift that he can't control. I thought that is a 2-hour movie in itself.
Right.
Just that story right there. So the film is filled with these kind of, like, they utter a line about Charlize's character Andy being the lover and muse of Rodin, the artist and stuff. And you're like, God, each of these little things that are just throwaway things are entire movies, And so the film is so rich. It's a great film because it really makes you think, doesn't it?
And it's such an interesting point that you say that, because it reminds me of the children's book, and I think it's a movie, Tuck Everlasting, where they bring up, maybe living forever, it's not everything it's, thought to be, right? Because you lose people you love. It's almost like Tom Hanks in The Green Mile too, right? He's outliving everybody. He's 110 years old, and while immortality and living seems great, I mean, you could even make the Steve Rogers comparison to why he went back to Peggy, but I guess that's but like, it does have its drawbacks, and I really love the way the old guard kind of touched upon that a little bit.
It does. That's its USP, is the toll. And psychologically, I mean, Charlize's character, being the oldest, obviously is suffering from it. It's interesting that the two suffering from it the most are the oldest, and before Niall comes along, the youngest. So Booker is a Frenchman from the Napoleonic Wars. So he's about 200 years old. So he's been immortal just long enough to have outlived everyone he's known. So he is suffering way more than the couple of Joe and Nikki, played by Marwan Kenzari and Luca Marinelli, who are from the Crusades, who are about 1,000 years old.
Right.
And then Charlize is like 4,000 years old. So it's really interesting that at the two ends of the spectrum, you have the greatest suffering.
And the mysterious way, Joey, that when they just cease to, like, I almost feel like they get a certain amount of healing, where they just stop living. And I thought that was a very powerful point too, from a other standpoint, where we find out that they really are immortal. The scene where there's a shootout and they're shot, and you think, oh, this is really early to see this, and you start to figure out who and what they are. It reminded me very much of the scene, I don't know if you've ever seen this movie, Equilibrium, with Christian Bale.
I love that. Sense offender.
Yes. So there's a scene in that movie
sense offending. Yeah.
where he shoots these people in the dark. It's one of the best action scenes I've ever seen, but it reminded me a little bit of that. Like, I feel like it's a great way to find out that these people are immortal.
Definitely, yeah. It's a cool opening, and I think for people that went into that film not knowing anything about it, they're like, holy shit, what the... I've seen some reviews where people were like completely caught off guard by that. I think it's cool, and it's very cool to be part of a landmark film. Not only is it cool, it's the number one film on Netflix at the moment globally, as far as I'm aware. But it's a landmark film in that, for several reasons. As you know, it's the first time a woman of color has been given a studio-sized action blockbuster to direct, and Gina Prince Bythewood is in the director's chair for this film.
Yep.
So that's my first time in my whole, at least, feature film career working for a female director
who passed on a Marvel movie to make it more impressive because she believed in this project, which is amazing. Like, I think this has potential to really pick up some steam, Joey. As far as maybe a couple movies out of this, I think we could make this count. Yeah,
it's clearly been left for more. I mean, my only regret with the film, I enjoyed it, is that almost it wasn't longer or wasn't a series, because there's so much in it. You think the story in just this film, you could probably spread out over series one of a series, just to develop more of the characters. I want to see Joe and Nikki's backstory in the Crusades. I want to see them fighting to the last man. All the other troops have died, and day turns to night, turns to day, and they fight till they're exhausted, and one of them gets slain, and the other collapses with exhaustion, and then the slain one reanimates, and then it goes on again until they're like, we're running out of food and water, we got to leave this place, and they end up going off together because they're the only people, and it being a cold, freezing night and them cuddling up together just to stay warm, and seeing how being nemesis trying to kill each other, how a love and a amorous relationship can develop out of that. Imagine just that on its own, seeing it. So my greatest regret is that there wasn't more time to see more and develop Chiwetel's character, Copley, the kind of villain trifecta of Merrick, played by Harry Melling, myself playing Keen, and Chiwetel playing Copley. You can tell watching it, you're like, God, I'm sure there's more underneath somewhere there. But because there's so much to fit into one film, of course, you've got to focus on the key antagonist thrust, or the key protagonist thrust. But yeah, that's my only crit. There's some great action in the film, especially as a female-led action film.
Right?
There's some great action. There's some great team action as well. Seeing the team, that's some of the coolest stuff when you're seeing the whole unit moving and working together, right?
Yeah. And there's so much you want to know more about, right? You'd like to see some scenes from the Crusades, or see, what she did in the Civil War. There's a lot there to be uncovered. You're so right with that.
Yeah. So it's a gift and a curse when a premise has that much promise.
Right.
Part of you is always going to be left unsatisfied somewhere because you're presented with so much. Whereas a lot of films, the promise is a lot less. So the film doesn't have to work so hard to tick a box and say, cool, okay, it did what it said on the tin, Right.
But
when a film is like, wow, but then that's what gives this such strong franchise potential, because there is a desire, I think, for most people that watched it, it's like, I want to see more. I want to see the other areas of this story that have been expanded. And Quinn, played by Veronica Ngo, her character being in the Iron Maiden at the bottom of the ocean. I mean, that's one of the most horrific concepts that I think people have been presented with for a long time.
Yes.
So, yeah, seeing her character's return. Is she going to be a villain in the next film? Are her and Booker going to team up to go against the old guard?
Yeah, that's so well said. Man, you have given me an hour and a half of your time, and I know it's late where you are. Joey, I can't thank you enough, man. It was like talking to a friend. We have so much in common as far as our movies and what we like. It was just so much fun talking to you tonight.
Completely. Look, anytime, man. I love speaking to impassioned people, and it's been a pleasure to be on your podcast. And yeah, anytime.